Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
All right, well, let's dive into this. So welcome back, everybody. This is episode number 77 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We've got Tasso joining us this morning, and we've got another special guest sitting in. We've got Preston Osborn from the ARA, American Rally Association, joining us again. Preston, you are the performance director of the ARA, and we're excited to have you back. First off, just want to talk to you about the 2022 season. When we went out to, where did we go? It was 100 acre. Like, it was a record attendance. It seems like 2022 has really gotten off to a great start for you guys. I mean, is that, what do you attribute that to, or what is your perception of that?
It's great. We, like you said, we've had record attendance, and actually even going back to last year, we were fortunate enough where ARA was able to kind of operate more or less through the pandemic because we could actually race completely touchless. Drivers and co-drivers stay in their cars, or volunteers stay out of their cars. And so we shut down for a few months, but came back pretty quick. And I think between people having more free time than maybe they had before, and disposable income changing a bit, we had a lot of car builds and logbooks issued, if you will, through 2020 into 2021. And so we had great numbers through all of last season, and it's continued into this season to the point where we have entry caps on all of our national races. And I think every race this year, except for Snowdrift thus far, has hit their entry cap. And
Wow.
Races like Oregon, which is next week, actually hit their entry cap within like 4 hours of entry opening. So it's become a bit of a race even just to get into the event versus compete in it. So it's great to see. Obviously I love to see the sport grow, and it always ebbs and flows, and certainly we're at a peak right now, and so it's just kind of riding that wave and keeping it going as long as it can.
Do you think it's just renewed interest in the sport, or are you seeing a lot of new faces? Is it familiar faces that have got new builds that, like, everybody's finally got their cars together and ready to run at the same time? Or
I think it's a bit of the perfect storm of a little bit of everything. We've had a lot of interest in the sport for new competitors over the last few years. I'm actually, as a matter of fact, working on the novice list for Oregon right now, so I see exactly how many new faces to expect, and I'd say it's maybe a little bit over what we've seen the last few years, but we also have some competitors who have taken a few years off that are coming back, so it's a little bit of A, a little bit of C, a little bit of Z, a little bit of everything. So it's of course exciting to be a part of it on this end and see the growth that we're seeing, but all in all, it's we've seen more entries at the top all the way through the grassroots guys. So, which is what I really like to see, and certainly the team likes to see, is we're not seeing increased entries just on one side of the field. It's everyone. We're getting more of the R5s and the RC2 cars over here towards the top, and then even down to the guys building their cars in the garage. We're seeing a lot of those guys coming out too. So it's just great.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I think I've heard it correctly, that even the two-wheel drive classes are seeing a lot of growth, or a lot of more interest too.
Yeah, traditionally the two-wheel drive classes are the highest entered, just because they're usually a little bit less expensive to build, and certainly someone getting started out, you can build a car for a pretty reasonable price and go out and be competitive and start entering races. I think that's something a lot of people underestimate is, Tasso, even like your car, how expensive a car like that is to build, and you have some people that'll build a car like that, break something in the first couple of races and never come back. And so I think, fortunately, with a lot of the support and help that not even ARA, but just the community has given as a whole, it's giving people more realistic expectations, and so they're starting with a build that's maybe a bit less expensive and a little more approachable, but instead of spending all this money on a build and then only doing one race a season, frees up some of their budget so that they can do 2 or 3 races in the season, which obviously helps us for entry numbers, but also gets people seat time, which, like any form of racing, is king. So
right.
You got to shout out two-wheel drive max attack teams too.
Yes.
Because those guys are the heart and soul of, grassroots rallying in this country. And it's great. Even as not a two-wheel drive guy, that's probably one of the Facebook groups that I enjoy the most on
Yeah,
on the kind of topic of rally.
It shows how rally can still stay lighthearted and fun, and they maybe a little bit of self-depreciating humor sometimes, and I've been the subject of more memes than I thought would ever be the case. But no, it's a fun group of guys, and I used to race with a lot of those guys. I spent a lot of time in two-wheel drive. So those are my people.
Yeah.
I think I've said this to you in a message before, I think too, like the way that you deal with some of the criticism you get there is perfect. Like it's because there's so many ways, as a technical director, performance director, whatever, that,
whatever hat I have on.
Yeah, right. Exactly that. So many ways that it could go poorly. And I think the way that you're doing it and just embracing it, like that's the perfect way to do it. Like I really appreciated that about, the kind of the way that you handle your position. So
thank you for the kind words. It's I understand I'm not going to make everyone happy every day, but it's trying to foster an environment for as many people as possible. And as much as I'm the primary decision maker for a lot of that, it's certainly a testament to the team that I've got around me too. We've worked hard to kind of get so many different perspectives within the ARA team, which has been missing from some other sanctioning bodies in the past. And so, we're not just full of people trying to cater to WRC cars. It's also how does this decision affect the grassroots guys, whether it's two-wheel or the lower budget four-wheel guys, or from a competition standpoint, the same thing. Of course, it creates a challenge because we have one set of rules, and so some decisions affect some groups more than others, but it's just always weighing all of those perspectives. And like I said, with the people that we've got on the team, it's great because we really do have a wide variety of perspectives to make those decisions. So
yeah, well, sorry, go ahead, Tasso.
No, I was going to hijack your podcast more here, John.
No, it's your podcast.
So for the more casual person that doesn't know, AP4, RC2, R4, WRC, ARA open class, these kind of various things. What's been going on? Because I think it's kind of cool seeing some of this other stuff come into the United States and actually compete. But for the person that doesn't know kind of what these classes are and stuff like that, what's like the 2 or 3 minute synopsis, and why is it so cool that these other cars are showing up to play? Because I think it really is pretty cool.
The U.S. is really a pretty unique situation where so much of the international competition has stuck with the FIA classes, which they certainly have a good place, and they're great cars, and especially when you're looking at a higher level of competition, what you get for your money, if you will, say buying a Rally 2 car and some of the other FIA-based classes, it's tough to compete with. I've worked for a number of teams, and we've built our own cars to be competitive with some of the FIA classes, which I'll talk about here in a second. And the reality is more often you're going to spend more money trying to develop a car that's competitive with those cars rather than just buying something off the shelf. But here in the US, we've really put in a lot of work to make sure that we still give the ability to build your own car versus just purely adopting the FIA pyramid. So really what the FIA pyramid is, at the top you have the Rally 1 cars, which are your, when you look up WRC cars on the internet, that's what you see. Those are your higher horsepower, huge suspension travel, aerodynamics. Those are let's say the really, really cool cars, but unattainable to most. With the rule changes that the WRC made going into this year with adding hybrid units and doing some other changes, it created this situation where you've got a number of the, let's say, older spec Rally 1 cars from 2017 to 2021 available to the market. And so you have people like Ken Block who have taken the WRC car and made changes to come into compliance with our rules, because we have different weight limits and restrictors and things like that they had to make changes for. Or Barry McKenna, which kind of took a lot of different parts off of different shelves, let's say, and created his own kind of car that's competitive for the US series. The reality is our roads are much faster than most international competition. And so the types of cars that you see competitive in the US are a little bit different because we have those higher speeds. So, you have a factory team like Subaru that's built cars, but you also have some of the smaller teams, say your Jeff Seahorns and your Sam Alberts, that have built their own cars to our open four-wheel drive rules, which right now are very, very open. There's not a whole lot of restrictions on them. So it's created a bit of an arms race. At the top of the field, which as a fan of the sport is really cool to see. Again, I never thought I was going to see a WRC car in person here on home US soil, but we've got basically two of them now. So,
right.
and then, working your way down. So the Rally 2 cars, those are your R5 cars, or they're called Rally 2 now. So those are again, everyone has a budget bigger than most, but those are your more budget friendly kind of top level cars. So there's still sequential transmissions and highly developed engines and turbos, but in four-wheel drive. And so those are your cars that are usually the top of most national rallies, I should say. So over in Europe, the top class is usually an RC2 car or a Rally 2 or a R5. We're going to run out of acronyms here soon.
Right.
But, you also have AP4 cars, which those are specific to the Asia Pacific Rally Championship, hence the AP. And those are very similar to the Rally 2 cars with some subtle changes, both to engine and chassis and a couple other things. So, and then working your way down, you kind of start to get into the new Rally 3 class, which I think is very, very interesting. So it's taking some of what the R5s and the Rally 2 cars have built as a foundation, but making it more budget friendly. And again, I say that a little tongue in cheek because they're still $100,000 cars, but you're able to get a car that's very capable, coming straight out of the factory and relatively inexpensive to run. So, it's a bit of an investment up front, but a lot less expensive to run per mile. Right now, the only Rally 3 car is a Ford Fiesta, but it's an all-wheel drive sequential Ford Fiesta, a little bit lower horsepower, of course, than say the R5s, a little bit more basic suspension. But looking at buying something off the shelf, it's tough to compete, and that's actually what they're using in the junior WRC now, are the Rally 3 cars. So, and then you get to the two-wheel drive classes. So, you have the Rally 4 and the Rally 5 cars. And for us, kind of the equivalent is the open two-wheel drive and the limited two-wheel drive. And so kind of every level of that FIA pyramid, we have a somewhat equivalent class here in the US. So your Rally 1 cars are pretty much our open four-wheel drive. Your RC2s are actually their own class here in the US right now. And then again, kind of working down, we have open two-wheel drive, which pretty much anything goes as long as only it has two driven wheels. That's about the only restrictions we have on it. And then limited is kind of more of a production-based two-wheel drive class. So again, catered to be very inexpensive to build and much more approachable for your guys getting started or your grassroots teams. So
yeah,
I know you said 2 or 3 minutes. That was probably 5 minutes.
Oh, no, that's perfect
right.
though. Because even people ask all the time. I have kind of more casual motorsports friends that I work with and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, these Subarus that come out to ARA stuff, are they like faster than WRC cars or what? And it's just like, dude, they're different. Like they're different budgets.
It's hard to compare.
Different
really
builds,
is.
right? Like it's, but yeah. So I think this stuff is great, and it's one of those things that occurred to me as I kind of got more into it, as I started to dabble with the stage rally thing. Is like we don't really we pull some FIA regulations, right? But we don't fit them largely, and it was I don't know, interesting to come into as a new rally fan a few years ago and kind of figure that stuff out. So
for us, we really want to still foster the creativity that you see in the US. The FIA has just become very cookie cutter. And it's, on one side of it's created amazing competition because from a build standpoint, all the cars are very, very similar. But again, from a creativity part, that's part of what makes US Rally so great. Is people put V8s in just about anything, and we have the V8 Sonic, we have the V8 RX-7.
I was going to mention the V8 Sonic and where that fits in the FIA pyramid, right?
I don't think V8s fit anywhere in the pyramid, but it's those types of builds that I want to make sure don't go away because they're interesting, and at the end of the day, I said it before, I'm still a fan of the sport. And so I want to see interesting things as much as we want great competition. And so it's just kind of striking that balance from the top to the bottom, with the different classes of how we can cater the rules and kind of foster that creativity and foster those changes while still giving a relevant platform for international cars to come over and compete. Because at the end of the day, the rally in the U.S. is still more grassroots than it is professional. We're slowly making that transition. And so as we've seen more Europeans coming over, the level of competition really has gone up just because it's a much bigger pool for us to pull from. And so again, it's all about a balance and a compromise and seeing what works. So.
Do you think, I think it would be fair to say that Rally in America has kind of been its own thing for a long, long time. And that Rally over in Europe also has kind of been its own thing, but that's really been established kind of as like the pinnacle because that's where WRC is involved. That's where the FIA is involved. Mm-hmm. And it seems like maybe would you say it's fair to say that in part that's because the rules have been so kind of different or separate so that you can't just like if you had somebody that wanted to like previously wanted to run like an FIA spec car, it would have been a lot harder to come over here and like run a couple events over here in the States, go back to Europe and run handful of events or a full season because the one car for the most part one of those cars just wouldn't fit into both rule sets easily. But it sounds like that's kind of one of the directions that you're moving to kind of try and make, at least at the pointy end of the classes, a little bit more parity between those.
Yeah, it's a very good point, John. It's as you said, up until pretty recently, you couldn't compete with some of the FIA class cars here just because they didn't fit in the rules at all. And, two-wheel drive, again, being a bit more open, you could kind of always fit in there. But also you would be a bit outclassed. I've raced in R2s and even the newer spec R2Ts, and compared to, say, some of the two-wheel drive cars that we've built, they're just not competitive because we have much less restrictions on the two-wheel drive class. And that was part of why, as the R5s became more popular, we actually created our own class, that still competed overall, but also had its own classing, which we call RC2, which is an FIA designation that fits things like the AP4 cars that Tasso mentioned and the R5s and now the Rally 2s and a couple other older N4s and I think even the S2000s are classed in the RC2 class. So it's kind of become a bit of a catch-all for that level of car, but that's because there's a lot of cars that kind of fit that performance level.
Right.
About the CRC, where do they, because they have an open class, and I think, and you got to correct me if I'm wrong because I'm a casual fan, like the Crosstreks that Subaru Canada, those were based on an AP4 build originally, right? Or were they bespoke for that?
They were pretty bespoke. So Rocket Rally is the one who developed and built those cars. And as far as I know, they're much less developed than, say, the Subarus we have racing over here. And they did borrow some parts from kind of all over. So I believe they may have been using like AP4 hubs and some suspension pieces. So a little bit of a hodgepodge mix. But the open four-wheel drive up in the CRC, which is the Canadian Rally Championship, for those who don't know, we've actually really started working on our partnership with Canada just so that the rules that we have kind of reflect one another, so that we talk about going international versus US. Well, technically Canada's international, but you have cars that would kind of fit in between both rules, but we're really trying to partner with them so that you could build one car that would be competitive on both sides of the border, at least here.
Yeah, well, and it's worth mentioning, like in the Canadian Rally Championship, it wouldn't make sense to go to all of the ARA events, but there's a good handful that would not actually be a crazy transit to come down from Canada and compete in.
Most commonly is on the western side of the country in Canada. You have Washington not far across the border, and Portland not that much further either. So
is that kind of trying to get that parity and make it so that, like, let's just call it enticing for guys that are in Canada or over in Europe that want to come over and just see what American Rally is all about. If they have a car, now they have a class that they could run it in. Are you seeing more people, like more of these international people, like definitely seeing more of these people come in and participate? And is that's what the cause of this is?
Absolutely, yeah. The last few years, we went from a couple here and there to we've got several teams that are actually European based that compete in our full championship, and that wasn't even a factor for the last probably decade. Way back when, even before my time involved in the sport in the early 2000s or kind of mid 2000s, they had the Group N cars were the top class, and so again, that's a European spec, an FIA spec car. And so there's a great US championship for a couple of years because again, you could get something off the shelf, if you will, and come compete not only in the US, but also over in Europe. And so we saw the competition from back then and saw the ease for those European teams. And the reality is the world is a very small place now. It's not that difficult to hop on a plane and, it's a long flight, but you can go back and forth. So I think right now we have 4 or 5 full-time American or full-time European teams that are competing here in the US. So and then plenty of kind of one-off events as well.
And because like Subaru has been kind of like the main, I don't know, manufacturer participant, manufacturer sponsor of the series for a good long time. Now, are you seeing that now these other teams that are coming in with like this FIA based car and with that kind of experience, are they finally really kind of taking the challenge to Subaru and kind of giving them a good run for their money and giving them competition up front that maybe was before all amongst kind of the Subarus themselves, whereas maybe now it's not?
Absolutely. Subaru has been the only manufacturer involved, at least on a manufacturer level, for a number of years now. And they're a great partner for the series, and they've done a ton for US Rally behind the scenes that a lot of the competitors don't even know.
Sure.
From something as simple as they actually give a rebate for entries to a certain number of Subarus that enter events, and they've done build refunds in the past and contingency money. So they've done a ton to foster growth within the sport. And they do the launch control series, which of course from a marketing standpoint is huge for us. So, but they've been the only fish in the sea, if you will. And so even Ken running the Hyundai this year, he may be a US based driver, but that's actually a European team running that car. So that's 2C, which is basically the junior Rally 1 team for Hyundai. So they are manufacturer supported, and that's where the car comes from. So Subaru's really had to up their competition or up what they've been doing from testing to car development, and they've come to us the last couple of years and said we have a story to sell, and when we're racing ourselves, then it's not that interesting. So
sure,
it's they still want to win, of course, because that's what they're in the business to do. But when you're just beating yourselves, it's not a very interesting story. And so against the teams like Ken's WRC car and Barry McKenna, it's definitely a tough battle, but they've shown that they're still up to the challenge and have a car capable of competing with them. And from our end, it's our job to make sure we're still kind of leveling the playing field, if you will, with the rules and what we do with those cars. So that's kind of a challenge in itself.
I bet. I mean, from a spectator standpoint, that's a huge win for people that like want to see like more fast cars and like want to see the battle at the front and have things really kind of come down to, the last couple stages and stuff. I mean, that's a huge win for sure. But I can only imagine trying to balance that and keep everybody on as even a playing field as possible with that different of a chassis, that's a challenge.
It is. And that's back to us really still trying to foster the unique cars that we have in the US. If you look at the FIA cars, they're all 5-door or 3-door hatchbacks and similar dimensions, and so it kind of simplifies the writing of the rules. Whereas theoretically, we're writing the rules for every car in existence.
Right.
It creates a challenge, but one that the team's up to, and one that we want to make sure we get right, so that we do have competition at the top, but we still have a lot of interesting builds and different people competing.
Yeah.
But kind of a, I don't know, difficult question, and I don't know if it's something even that you can share kind of your process there when you guys get together to adjust or create these rules. What techniques do you have to actually try and keep that playing field kind of fair and honest, and kind of balance the really kind of different kind of cars to show up, right? You got a big mix. So
at the top of the field, there's a lot of different factors you have to look at. On a basic level, yes, you look at power to weight ratio, just because that obviously changes the dynamics of the car quite a bit. When you've got one car with significantly more power to weight, then they're probably going to be faster.
Right.
But even past that, as we've seen advances in the series, aerodynamics has really come into play, and so we've had to do some work. We have a couple of contacts within the industry for looking at aerodynamics and airflow concepts, just so that we can do what we need to do to try to keep balance there. And the tough thing with any type of bodywork changes is it's expensive to develop. Whether it's wind tunnels or CFD programs, it's very specialized. And so even though it's becoming more common, it's still very expensive. And so that factors in. But then also, suspension design, typically we've been pretty free as far as suspension design goes, at least on the top of the field. And at the end of the day, the teams know what the fastest suspension is, as far as, when you're looking at things like caster and your control arm angles and everything like that. So even though it's open, they all end up relatively similar. So we haven't done a whole lot there, but it's again, there's a number of different things we have to look at, and it's not just power to weight. And even from power to weight ratio, okay, well, how do you get that? Is it lowering the horsepower, or is it adding more weight, or is it restrictor changes, boost changes? There's so many different tools in our tool bag to make those changes, that it gives us some creativity there.
It seems like the difficult challenge that you have, because you don't want to turn it into an almost like an entirely spec series, like kind of what the FIA has become, where it's really cut down to the drivers by and large, because there's not very much variation between those cars.
Mm-hmm.
But then here in the States, like the Hill Climb series and the Rally series is so based on this grassroots run what you brung, like kind of mentality. Like if you've got an idea for some kind of rear wheel drive car that you think will be fast on dirt, and you can build it, there's people that want to do that, and they want to try it out in this arena. So it seems like you're trying to balance, like, letting people try things, but also, making room for these spec cars at the same time, which is like, those are like almost two completely opposing like approaches, really.
Yeah, for the FIA cars, those are very simple because it's copy and paste, literally.
Yeah.
But when it comes to developing the other rules, we talked about how decisions affect different parts of the field. And so, when me and the team are looking at, say, the open four-wheel drive rules moving forward, it's how does this affect a top competitor? How does this affect the guy that's just trying to build something in his garage? There are some things that, if we give allowances, the top teams can really exploit that and can be much faster because of it. Whereas the lower team, if you will, really wants that change because maybe it's much more simple. We had a pretty lengthy debate a few years ago, actually, just when I was coming into this role, about fresh air systems for ALS.
For anti-lag, yeah.
For a long time, it was illegal because the costs were so extraordinary. And so really it would make it so the top couple of teams can do it, but none of the other teams could. And it's been that way for a long time. Well, in the last, let's say, 5 years, most of your even relatively basic Motec systems or standalone computer systems could control fresh air ALS, and there was more tuners that were getting experienced with it. And so those costs came down pretty dramatically. And so we had a number of our smaller teams actually come to us and say, we want you to allow fresh air systems because it's a more reliable system. It's actually easier on a lot of the components, because your exhaust temperatures go way down compared to running a traditional ALS system. And so that was a decision we made to allow it because because of competitor feedback and requests for it. So,
but in part because it was more widely available. So it wouldn't be
Correct,
something that you
correct.
could allow that only the guys that had like nearly unlimited budgets could exploit, because then they'd be just running away from everybody. Now it was something that it's allowable because now it actually could bring the competition closer between, more of the privateers and the factory teams.
Yeah, and even just from a cost perspective, again, you spend a little bit of money now to save more money later, and like any form of motorsports, if you have the opportunity to do that, you usually want to.
Yeah.
No one likes to build engines after every single race,
Right.
And some changes you can make like that, which maybe are a minor performance change, can be a big reliability change. You see that with some of the transmission rules, and
Sure.
even when you're looking at sequential shift, you can change shift timing and your length of ignition cut, which helps save dogs and saves gears, and so that's again another part of the decision making process.
Sure,
when we're
sure.
looking at things like this. Yeah.
Well, and that's cool, because I mean, what it would seem like maybe those decisions are made to cater to that top end. But like from that reliability standpoint, I mean, like the first example of this that makes me think of is when they, in production GT, when they opened up to let us put in the 6-speed transmissions, because the 5-speed transmissions in rally application, there were so many guys that were having issues with them that it was becoming this really expensive thing you're having to change out fairly often. They're like, well, if we let you guys put in a 6-speed, would that increase the reliability so that then, like, if you look at the cost of a season for a lot of these privateers, it would actually, a little bit of an expense up front, but it would actually reduce the cost of running a whole season and make the cars a little bit more competitive. And so that was, I mean, it's like that kind of mentality for a lot of these other more recent changes they made, it seems.
Yeah, we're even seeing it on a grassroots level. The H6 slot for Subarus has become much more affordable, and as more and more of those cars have gotten older, the cars with the H6s in it, you can get a motor out of a junkyard or remanufactured or whatever for pretty inexpensive. And in the past, people have had to run high-strung 4-cylinders to try and be competitive in the NA 4-wheel drive class, or the open light class, as it was called before. Whereas now you can take an off-the-shelf H6, put it in the car with relatively minor changes, and now you can make similar horsepower as a high-strung 4-cylinder for much less money, and the reliability is also much better. So we've had to do some things with again weight to try and balance the performance level of it, but still giving competitors the opportunity to go that route to try and make a little bit more horsepower while still keeping as good as reliability can go when you're talking in a motorsport application. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the great thing, if you're a competitor looking at this, I mean, in like seeing these changes and thinking what's happened in the last 2-3 years, and now how many cars are coming out, that all kind of fits, because if you're looking at this series and, okay, well, how much is it going to cost me to build a car to compete in this series versus this series versus this series? And if all of a sudden now there are these options where you can get the performance up and be competitive, but you have choices that are better reliability, or from a reliability standpoint, it makes it much more appealing to build a car and come out and compete.
And again, it's back to that, you can do 3 races instead of 2 races because your cost per race goes down.
Yep.
That's something we have a small amount of control over, not a big amount, but anything we can do to kind of help competitors be able to race more often is good for everyone. It's good for us because entry numbers go up. It's good for events because they have more people coming to races, and it's good for competitors because they get to do the fun part of racing rather than spending time in the garage.
For sure. Well, and I guess the elephant in the room is how are these people that are bringing WRC cars going to fit into this? Is this something, I don't know how much you want to get into it, but is that something you're just going to kind of have to juggle, or what is your thought process there? Because it's really cool from a spectator standpoint, like you said, but like that makes that pointing into like the open unlimited class for 4-wheel drive challenging, to say the least.
Right. It's pushing that top end of the field to be even more unattainable. And especially as we're trying to bring in more teams to be competitive at the top of the field, that budget keeps going higher and higher. And and it's just not sustainable. There's very few people that say have the money that Subaru, McKenna, and can have to be able to put into a program
Right.
to run cars at that level, and we're certainly sensitive to that. Again, it's exciting. It's cool to see those cars, but when you've only got a couple people actually competing for a championship or competing for a win, you can lose interest in the sport pretty quickly. And so, the big changes we're making for the 2023 rules on our end is changes to that open four-wheel drive class, and it's really the direction where that we're going, and that the team and I have decided to push is that Rally 2 level of performance. So again, that's similar to a lot of the national championships around the world. Is that level of performance, because the other part of it is with cars becoming as advanced as they are, the speeds we see on the stages are much higher, and safety comes into play as well. And obviously that's something we're sensitive to as a sanctioning body for the sport, and let's say the one signing the insurance.
Right.
And so we have to be mindful for that, and so what we see is going this direction of catering the rules to the open four-wheel drive class to be on a similar level as the Rally 2 cars. It gives competitors the option of, say, buying a car from M Sport, Skoda, whoever it is, being a Rally 2 car, or building their own car to be competitive against them, and kind of capping the performance at that level. And the way we see it, it's really going to open the top end of the field as far as the number of competitors that will be competing for those overall wins. And yes, we will lose the WRC cars, unfortunately, because we're making some pretty dramatic bodywork changes, or restrictions, if you will. So we're going to lose those, but again, the trade-off is we expect competition to be much better at the top of the field.
Right. And like I said, attainable. Because
Exactly,
I remember there was, back when we were competing more in rally every season, that was one of the things, is like you had to be really careful what you did, because you make this one change, all of a sudden now you're an open class, and then it's like, well, if we just do this one thing, all of a sudden it's a race for 10th place.
Right.
Because like our car's not competitive, it's
so it's the best of the rest is
right.
kind of what you see, and you're always going to have it in any sport. I mean, even look at Formula One. You have your mid pack, but sometimes your most exciting competition is there. But in rally, at least in the U.S., there's not many people paying attention to the mid pack.
But like as a competitor, especially as a privateer, if you're like, well, I have no shot here, then you don't build your car for that class. You scale it down. You try and build your car. I mean, unless you've really you think you've got something that will work. I mean, you just would stay out of that class, and then that really limits the entries in this, whatever the top field would be. And so like that can have some attrition over the years, and that's I think that
absolutely, and
this is a way to avoid that.
Right. We talked about budgets before, and it's still a pretty big budget to go after the top level of any championship, right? But knowing what it costs to, say, build McKenna's car, obviously the WRC car, and even the Subarus, we're changing that by several factors. It goes from being, let's say, upper six digits to, you can buy a Rally 2 car off the shelf for about $200,000, which, again, I know is still a very big budget, but you have more people capable of doing that, being competitive at the top of the field, than you do spending $1 million to build a car. So.
Yeah. Well, Tasso, you look like you got something on your mind over there.
No, I'm just thinking about these budgets. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
It is a thing, though,
crazy.
in general, that we run into with the hill climbs too, with our crazy open rule set, is, even though it is, in the grand scheme of rally, an extremely budget thing, we still have, folks like myself or Dave Kern that build a car specifically to that rule set, and even have some say in the rule set to make sure that we stay legal, which is a little bit of a whatever it is. But we do have the same kind of thing where there's folks that come in like, well, I'm not going to do that, so why do I even bother doing this class, right? And so it's at times there have been like, why don't these idiots just go run unlimited and give us our rally class back? And I certainly have some sympathy for a lot of the decision making you have to go through and the effort you put into trying to keep things attainable, competitive, reasonable, stuff like that. Because it's, at least we're a small enough series and kind of a small enough class that at the moment everyone's pretty much just doing it for fun anyways, but
Yep.
there are significant financial concerns for a Hoonigan racing division or a Subaru Motorsports USA, Vermont Sports Car, whatever, or Barry McKenna and his outfit, even though it seems like he's doing it for fun, right? But I'm sure he still has financial pressure.
He still wants to win,
to deliver, right? It's
actually talking with Barry's team it was interesting because they invested all this money in this mixed WRC car to come compete the series and race against Subaru, and they obviously have spent a ton of money doing it. And when we've been talking with some of the top teams about the direction we wanted to go, and we actually had a meeting with I think it was 8 or 10 top teams kind of last spring about the direction we wanted to go. And talking with them, they're all like, well, at the end of the day, we're going to build a car to win. And so if you're lowering that ceiling to where we were talking about, Barry goes from spending ungodly amounts of money to build a car and race a car to, well, now I can just run one of my Rally 2 cars. And again, yes, it's still an unattainable budget to most of us, but for people like him, it's significantly less. And so it turns into him able to do more with the sport. And, I think something that's underestimated is, of course, this affects the pointy end of the field more than anyone else. But as our competition goes up and we get more people involved at the top end of the sport, it is one of the rare situations where you do see kind of the trickle-down economics. That the better competition we have, the more enticing it is to sponsors, and so the more money that we can invest in the series, that does help the grassroots guys. You look at something I think I even talked about on the podcast last time, which was Rally Sync. That's an expensive system, and without the support of some of our sponsors, it just wouldn't be possible. And as we get more investment in the series, we can start to bring in more things like that, and the grassroots guys love that system. It's been overwhelmingly positive as far as the feedback that we've gotten for it. But if we didn't have sponsors helping to fund that, then no matter how much people liked it, is going to jump entries up quite a bit. And for the top guys, that's not a big deal, but obviously, keeping in mind the grassroots side of the field, if we had to raise entries $500 a race, it's going to push half the field out. So
it's a snowball, right? Like the more successful the series does, the more successful the pointy end teams do, the more successful the amateur teams do. Even when it comes to stuff like for the amateur team seeking sponsorship for their effort, right? So maybe they're not getting 6-digit checks from whoever, but they are getting some product support. Kind of the world that I live in here. If I can say, hey, I'm competing in ARA and they get 100,000 eyeballs on their events per event, then that's one of those things.
It's easier for you to sell, and actually something that Jeremy Meyer, who's our kind of marketing and business director for ARA, a big thing that we've been working on is kind of creating sponsorship packets for competitors, so
helping
that
the competitors with it.
So that
that's amazing.
As we're seeing these numbers grow, and having Dirtfish on board has been huge for our marketing. Well, now we can take all the numbers that we're seeing, give that to competitors and help them approach sponsors. As you say, Tasso, even if it's as small as a product sponsorship, or even a local shop that say will line your car, that's money that's you're huge. No longer spending out of your pocket, that you can put either towards something else on the car or more races. So.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that makes or breaks an amateur season. So that's amazing that you guys are doing it. That's a great resource.
Well, and just like opening up the classes, or trying to make sure that there's competition in all the classes, like you're saying, Subaru's trying to tell their story, and if there's an actual competition, that's a better story. The more you can open up each class to have like 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that there's a story in each one of their rallies, and how they got to where they ended up, on the podium or whatnot. I mean, that's more chances to spark interest out there. And you guys, what ARA Dirtfish and Subaru with launch control have been doing, from giving us those behind the scenes and that access to more of what's going on is very cool. And I'm sure that's getting more people's attention, getting more spectator interest out there.
It is. From marketing perspective, I think compared to 2020, we've seen almost 100% increase in your impressions and engagements, which are king when it comes to social media. It's been a pretty dramatic change, from when kind of the current ARA team was put in place and took over. So, and it helps everyone top to bottom. And as you say, from looking at each individual class, both nationally and regionally, as we're seeing more competitors, the competition is becoming better. But one of the things that really attracted me to Rally when I first got started all those years ago was the community and the friendly competition. And you even look at a class like the limited two-wheel drive class, which right now we have a combined, basically all two-wheel drive on a national level compete together, because we had such poor entries for the limited two-wheel drive class on a national level. And so, to give you an idea, last year we had 5 eligible for the championship the entire season. I think the highest entered race, we had 3 at one race. And so that's why it's been a combined class. Whereas this year, we've seen 8 or 9 limited two-wheel drive entries nationally at most of the races this year. And so as that class grows, well, now we can talk about splitting it off so that they're competing just within that own group again. Because, reality is limited cars can't really keep up with the open class cars for obvious reasons. But, we also don't want to give a trophy out to the one guy that shows up and finishes.
Right.
I have some experience with desert racing, and I mean, they've got a class for every possible thing you can imagine. And you end up with trophy hunters, which, we don't really have that in Rally, maybe to a lesser level. And we're trying to not go that direction. We're actually talking about a historic class recently, because we're starting to get some interest in that. And so I was talking with a few different competitors about that. And they said, oh, well, look at the Irish Championship. They've got an amazing historic championship, which they really do. But they also have, and I'm not exaggerating here, 38 historic classes within just the Irish Championship, because it's like every 3 years is a different class, and it seems like every 300 cc's engine size is a different class, and it's just not realistic.
Right For sure.
I mean, that would be really cool though. I can think of a number of cars that maybe wouldn't be super competitive in a two-wheel drive championship right now that would just be hilarious to go. And of course, I'm thinking V8s. Like, yeah.
But and I'll tell you, like, the challenge, say, for a historic class is you go, okay, well, a historic class, just if you're in this date range, then you race historic. Well, perfect. Now you've got Seamus Burke and his 300 whatever horsepower, custom suspension escort racing against you. It's like, oh, okay, well then let's limit this. You have the open historic, and then you have the factory historic, and then they go, well, we don't want anything factory because we got to replace all the archaic suspension pieces anyways. And that's like, okay, well, just in a brief conversation, all of a sudden you end up with 4 different historic classes. 2-wheel, 4-wheel, date ranges, and so I'm very open to it, and I'd love to see a historic class here, but we also don't want another class with 2 people competing.
Yeah. Well, and what that makes me think of too is, are you now, with all of this new, like all these people that are coming in and getting involved in the sport again and getting all these record entries, are you hitting a point where, like, especially if you were going to open up all these other classes, where, like, are you kind of maxed out as far as how many cars you can have at an event? Like, is it like 100, 110, 120? And to get to the point where, like, well, if there's this many cars that are going to be going on stage, then that means, like, the number of stages can be less, or you'd have to do it over more days because there's just too many cars. So, like, are you starting to bump up against that?
Oh, absolutely. Again, we've hit every entry cap that basically we've had for the last couple of years.
Well, and I guess what I mean by that is, like, there's not really an easy way to easily increase the entry cap to let more and more people in if you had all these other classes.
There's not. It varies event to event, but you're usually limited by either your physical space. So say like Oregon is limited by their service space. They can't have 100 cars there because one of their service areas really only fits 80 to 85. And so that's where their entry cap comes from. Some of the other ones are down to stage schedule. If you're running the same stage twice, even if you put a couple of stages in between it with 90 cars, you figure at minimum that's 90 minutes of cars that are on the stage. And if it's a 10-mile stage, well, now it's 100 minutes, from the last car starting or first car starting to the last car finishing. And so it presents a pretty unique challenge to the events. Again, very good problems to have, but there's not easy solutions to them. The events only have so many stage roads available to them. So the easy solution of, just add another stage in there and, it increases your runtime is not always an option. So really what we've been working with the events on is adding smaller regional events. So yes, the national event is kind of your showcase. Everyone wants to run it, but we kind of prioritize the national entries a little bit because, they're running the national series and investing in the series as a whole. But as Olympus is a great example. So they added Tour de Force a few years ago. And so, yes, they still had 92 entries, I think, started Olympus this year. But Tour de Force, which is their regional event, run on the same roads as Olympus. They've had 30 plus or 40 entries for that regional event. And so that's giving all of the regional teams more opportunity to get the stage miles to compete against each other. You don't get to see Ken Block racing at the same race you are, but at the end of the day, it gives you more opportunity to get that seat time and compete against your friends. So
and is that just done on a different weekend or do like alternate days? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they'll do it on a different weekend. So like Olympus was April, a few weeks ago, and Tour de Force I think is scheduled for November or something like that. So
how much of a priority do you think it is for ARA to try and give those smaller regional events at least some amount of coverage that like the national events get, just so that like it's not just you and your buddies playing on these roads that you can tell your stories, but it doesn't get the same kind of coverage as maybe the national events do.
Right. It's something we've been working on with Dirtfish, and certainly a priority we've talked with them about this year is, no, we don't expect the same national coverage, that we would have for the bigger events. And part of the reason for that just comes down to budgets. Even from our end, it's a priority for the team and I to keep regional events as inexpensive as possible. And so even our sanction fees for regional events, to be frank, we actually lose money on them. But kind of with the expectation of we foster and cater these smaller regional events, get the competitors involved, and again, they can enter more events and helps us in the long run.
It's a feeder series. Like get somebody that competes in the regional events for a couple of years and starts out the car, gets comfortable, gets faster, and then now I'm ready to go to national. You don't have to make that jump right away.
Right. But it's the same thing from a media perspective as well. Dirtfish obviously invests money to send people to events, and for them, as far as the advertising that they get for, say, a regional event is different than a national event. So what they've kind of been doing a good job with is still getting the stories and writing articles without necessarily having to be on site. The nice thing is with the way the scoring systems work now, and everything being online, you can still follow the event without physically being there. Okay, you miss out, of course, on a little bit of the stories that maybe you would never see without being there. But to at least give some attention to the smaller regional events and certainly the regional competitors is important to us. And so it's doing what we can with the limited budget that we can put towards those series right now, or those races right now, while still promoting them the way they deserve it and giving them that attention, like you say, to be able to go to sponsors or whatever they're looking for.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, Preston, as we're getting towards the end here, I have to ask you about something, and I don't know how much you can tell me. All right. There's been rumors that the WRC is looking to add an event here in the States again. And I've heard as early as next year. Are you aware of this? Like, are you aware of this happening? Can you tell us anything?
Yeah, I can tell you some stuff at least. So the ARA we're part of USAC, is our parent company, and USAC is part of ACUS. Again, getting into as many acronyms as we can fit in this time. ACUS is the FIA representative basically for the US. And so any FIA event that comes to the US goes through ACUS. And ACUS has, I think it's 6 different sanctioning bodies, depending on the type of racing. ARA is basically the rally representative for ACUS. And so, there's things in the works. There's nothing concrete yet. And an event of that size requires a lot of investment from companies, from sponsors, a lot of personnel involved. And so it's figuring out all those pieces of the puzzle before an event can come to the US. But, I'll tell you that WRC and the promoter for the WRC and certainly the FIA are very interested in coming to the US. And so it's just finding what's going to work and making sure that it's realistic and reasonable to put on an event here in the US.
Do you have a sense of how comparable the scale would be of a WRC event versus what you're doing at a national event? Because when you watch a WRC event or watch the coverage of the WRC event, you're seeing just that top class of car.
Mm-hmm.
But usually there's a whole bunch of other classes that are running as well, at least over there. Like, is that the logistics? Is it that they're just trying to bring over that top class, or are they trying to do like the whole thing for all those people that want to come over?
Interestingly, a WRC event is much smaller as far as the number of entries than you would expect.
Okay.
Generally, a WRC event, sometimes they'll have a national event associated with it. But even then, it's still limited on the number of entries. But from the WRC perspective, you usually have 10 or so Rally 1 cars, maybe about 20 or so Rally 2 cars, and then, maybe about 20 or so of the either Rally 3 or the 2-wheel drive classes. So most of your WRC events have less than 50 entries.
Wow. Okay.
And part of that is the requirements of the WRC event from a scheduling perspective is much, much different than we do here on a national level, because you have to worry about things, even down to getting helicopters in place, for each Rally 1 car. That takes time. And so your schedule just ends up much more drawn out, and that's part of what limits the number of entries that you can't have and really changes the logistics. From a budgetary standpoint, U.S. rallies tend to run pretty lean, and of course, from the total budget perspective, that's on the event versus, say, ARA. We're involved from the sanctioning side of it, but at the end of the day, it's how much money the event is going to have as a budget.
Each individual event.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And I can tell you a WRC event is about 20 to 30 times larger from a budget standpoint than our national events.
Wow.
So it's
just
a very
bigger.
different scale.
Right.
And again, it comes down to logistics.
Sure.
For TV and they do live streaming of all their stages, which is just not something that's possible for us at our budget level. So aspirationally, I hope one day we can do that, but I also know the amount of money it takes to do that, and we're still a few years away from that.
Sure.
I think you got to look at the success of Formula One kind of coming back and then now increasing their presence in the United States with adding Miami just this last weekend, right?
As we're recording this,
even if traditionally, they don't know when we recorded this. Miami GP just happened.
Yep.
Even though traditionally we're not a country that has really followed a lot of these, so-called European or international, whatever, WRC, Formula One, all these kind of things, they not only are they growing in their fan base here, but also there's a lot of folks that just really like participating in the event of the whole thing, right? I'm sure there are folks that go down Dakota or went to Miami this last weekend that, they're still not diehard Formula One fans, like maybe would show up at, Silverstone or something like that, right? But, similar to the Kentucky Derby, right? There's 99% of people that go to the Kentucky Derby aren't diehard horse racing fans, but they love the whole thing of it, right?
It's the event itself rather than what they're going for, if you will.
Yeah.
Right, and that's something WRC I think having not been to one, but having been a larger WRC fan over the years, and maybe some other things I've followed, right? Like I love watching. I can put on just on YouTube, just in 45 minutes of a 45-minute service, and just let it play in the background and that kind of thing. So just be even just going to watch a professional service crew do their thing would be amazing. And I think that's the kind of thing that I don't think I'm the only one in that boat. It would be great. I think the country is ready for it. That's sort of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel you say with Formula One, and part of what's driven the interest for Formula One in the U.S. Liberty Media, who is now the promoter for Formula One, is a U.S.-based company, and Drive to Survive from Netflix has really increased viewership there. But even before then, with F1 coming back to COTA, I went the first year that F1 was at COTA. And as far as F1 crowds go, is pretty small. I could go just about anywhere I wanted because there's a lot of empty seats. But even before Drive to Survive, it's grown every single year, and I think that's still part of talking about how small the world has become. That it's much easier to follow some of these larger international sports. F1 is the second largest sport in the world and the largest motorsport in the world.
Yeah.
As far as the sport goes, only beat by soccer, which again is much smaller here in the U.S.
Right.
WRC, if I remember correctly, I think is the second largest motorsport in the world. But again, smaller fan base here in the U.S. So as more people are exposed to rally in the U.S., through things like launch control, through Dirtfish's media outreach becoming larger and larger, we're only seeing the attention grow, and certainly bringing the WRC event to the U.S. is only going to greatly contribute to that. And I can tell you, with working with Dirtfish, they have a very large media presence over in Europe and the rest of the world. Since rally is so big, and they've become a pretty big media wing for the WRC. And
over here in the States, yeah.
Right. And I can't tell you the number of times I'm talking with the WRC or with the Dirtfish crew, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we get people asking all the time, like, wait, there's rally in the U.S." And it's great for us because they find Dirtfish through their coverage of the WRC, but then they see Dirtfish puts out this article about Ken Block's WRC car coming to the ARA, or Brandon Semenick competing in the Subaru, and so it's putting eyeballs on our series that we would have never had. But now that the media coverage is larger, and having a partner like Dirtfish has obviously contributed that to the point that we would never be able to do. It's getting that interest, like you're saying, Tasso, of people who are more casual finding out about the sport, and if a WRC race comes, then it's only going to grow that.
Yeah. Well, and that's, it all kind of plays into each other. It seems like there's maybe this renewed enthusiasm for motorsports in general here in the U.S. and in part maybe because people found Drive to Survive, which led them to Formula One. And the cool thing there, that's kind of why I was asking about like the stories of the regional guys, is I think the reason that Drive to Survive engaged so many people is that it was telling the stories of the teams and of the drivers, behind the scenes stuff that oftentimes you would not really know unless you're a diehard fan. But then all of a sudden, it's those stories that's what grabs people, and then they want to see what's going on.
Such a sterile professional field, it makes it real and gritty and that kind of thing. It really draws people in. I agree with that.
Well, and I also think it's part of the new generation of race drivers as well. You look at Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, and they are also streamers, which is engaging a different audience than you've ever had with F1, or a lot of motorsports in general. And I think part of it is also, you look here in the U.S. and what is still the most popular, if not one of the most popular motorsports, being NASCAR. They're losing so many fans because and certainly your younger generation's not interested in NASCAR, but that doesn't mean they're not interested in racing. And so they, you have a pretty large demographic that's been looking for, let's say, a motorsport outlet that they're not finding in NASCAR, and so they're looking for something to kind of latch onto. And I think you've seen a lot of kind of that group find Formula One through Netflix or through your streamers or whatever it is, and now they've found their outlet in Formula One, and some of them maybe we'll come to Rally. We'll see.
Well, yeah, that's the other part of it. Is like once they find out, like, well, look at all the stuff that's going on in this motorsports. Well, I know there's other motorsports, and like Rally is this other thing that I think you wouldn't have to search too hard to go from like Formula One being the pinnacle to find WRC and Rally being this other type of racing that's really dominant worldwide, and then start to explore that.
Well, and the benefit is you have a lot of the same media companies covering F1 that also cover WRC, because everywhere else outside of the US, you know, they're the two largest motorsport. And so you're going to have similar crossover there. And, you know, I'm as active as I can be on some social media, and actually Reddit has a pretty big Rally population that's growing. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen people on the Rally subreddit, you know, go, oh, is there Rally in the US? And how do I find it? And come to find out they're 20 minutes from 100 Acre Wood, or, you know, 30 minutes from Southern Ohio. And, you know, I think it's a problem that, you know, the team and I are trying to solve, where we've got the hardcore Rally fans that know about our sport and follow our sport. It's getting the more casual engagement that, you know, if it's close by, say within a couple hours, they come to the sport or come to a race and watch or volunteer, whatever the case is, but just don't know. They have no idea that our sport is here. So, you know, it's the old joke we say, if a car races in the woods and no one's there to watch it, did it happen? And so it's getting those more casual fans engaged with the sport and just know we exist.
that is the challenge
so
for sure.
So many people know rallies. They know of Rally, right? But they don't know how close it is, how attainable it is, whether to watch it or participate. I mean, so many people, you know, whether on an airplane or just casually talking to somebody out in the world, and you know, oh, you know, what's Haltech or what's whatever, all this other stuff, right? Like, oh, it's, you know, from a rally car. Like, oh, what, rally car? Really? That's cool. Right? What do you got? Subaru? Oh yeah, that's great. Oh, I totally wanted one back. Or, oh, I used to play this video game. Or that's cool. I didn't know that they were still doing that kind of thing. You know, and that kind of, so it's.
Do you think, Preston, that one of the keys to opening that might be trying to get another full-on manufacturer or two to actually participate in the series? Because I'm thinking here, like Subaru has launch control. You see their releases of vehicles, and they talk about their rally heritage. I mean, Subaru, like rally is in their blood, to say the least, and they will mention it and promote it. But Subaru, in the grand scheme of things, is a bit of a small brand. So, like, if you could get some other manufacturers that have rally heritage, like Hyundai, maybe Toyota. I don't know if Mitsubishi would ever come back, but some manufacturer
Ford,
that would.
I mean, Ford's involved.
Ford would be perfect, where they could actually, in their PR and promotion, like showcase what their participation in rally has been.
You know, obviously, any additional manufacturer support will make a big impact for us, you know, from a marketing perspective. And it's, you know, talking with the Fords and the Hyundais and the Toyotas, you know, for us, it's for our series to make sense for them from a marketing perspective. And you know, you look internationally, you know, the three you just named, Toyota, Hyundai, and Ford, they have a huge presence in the WRC and zero presence here in the US.
Right.
And, you know, as we're having conversations with those types of manufacturers, it's showing them why they need to be involved with our sport and the opportunity they have from a promotional standpoint. And, you know, we haven't talked much in the way of specifics with the 2023 rules, and a lot of the changes in directions are so that, say, a team like Hyundai, which has a Rally 2 car, you know, they could have a relatively small operation here in the U.S.
Yeah, they already have the car.
Yeah, running one of their Rally 2 cars and be competitive for overall championships. But the other problem we have is with the makeup of cars being very different internationally compared to the U.S. You know, our cars are much larger and much more horsepower, and that's a side effect of how big the U.S. is, and you know, how straight our roads are, let's say.
Right.
You know, Ford, Toyota, Hyundai, they don't sell the cars in the U.S. that they actually build internationally. Yeah. So it's trying to bridge that gap, and there's not a perfect solution for it. You know, Toyota releasing their GR Corolla is kind of a step towards that direction. And so we'll see how successful that is for them as a brand. But that would be a perfect stepping stone or a platform for them to rally a car similar to that in the U.S. and show off some of that racing heritage that they certainly promoted in their release. And we'll see if they want to be involved from a motorsport side here in the U.S.
Yeah. Even that, right? The Corolla is not their GR, it's not the Kazoo racing, so right, the Yaris, and the Corolla is what, their NASCAR body, right? Mm-hmm. Is that right? So it's, even then they're kind of hedging their bet there with their US, marketing with well, we know you guys like NASCAR. Here's the thing,
pretty much. And it's trying to change that mentality. And, we talked about the potential of bringing a WRC race here in the US and that will obviously help that conversation to happen.
Sure. Getting the WRC here and having these manufacturers that have a car that all of a sudden now you could take this car they already have and plug it into the top class.
Yeah.
So it's like that reduces R&D. I mean, that should make it a lot more appealing than it's just that oddity of but you don't sell it here in the US.
Right. Yeah.
But you know what? You get you could do some testing and you could bring those cool cars over.
Yeah. I don't know a whole lot about NASCAR, but I don't think the Corolla they race in NASCAR looks a whole lot like the Corolla they sell and say, I don't even know what Ford.
But you know what? You said that there's a lot of openings in your two-wheel drive class.
Yes.
You should make a call to one of those NASCAR teams and say, you know what? Do you think you could put some dirt tires on this thing?
Hill climbs, we got that locked out already. So
that's true.
Why don't you find something else? ARA.
Yeah. We've got a couple. We got a Camaro that races, a couple of Mustangs. Again, our rules allow it, and so we obviously welcome them. Whether they're competitive or not is a different story. But,
from the hill climbs and for some like the dirt circle tracks and stuff like that, there actually is like parts and like support for taking some of those, big V8 engines and making them go fast on dirt.
Yes. The nice thing and part of the reason why our open two-wheel drive class is as pretty much unlimited as it is, your traction limited by two wheels.
Sure.
And so you can make 1,000 horsepower in a dirt rally car if you wanted to, but if you're only driving two wheels, you're not going to be able to use a whole lot of that.
Right. Well, and you know what? Talking about this last part I have a question, which is how important is it for rally to be based on a production car? I guess from a grassroots standpoint, that's what a lot of the entry-level people are doing. They're here's a chassis that it's all-wheel drive, it's a Subaru, whatever. There's all this support and parts to take this car and turn it into a rally car. But how critical is that for the series to have all these cars that are based on production vehicles?
I think we're at a bit of a turning point for the sport. A production-based car has been the core of the sport going all the way back to the very first races they had. Is a production car, and manufacturers wanted to show how fast and how capable their cars coming out of the factory were. Then you go into the Group B days, which you had homologation specials, which you still had to have 200 cars.
It's a production car.
Yes. Yeah. And so it got away from that a little bit, but then Group A followed that, and it kind of went back to it's got to be a production car, and you're allowed a range of modifications. Here in the U.S., we've pretty much always followed that template that it's got to be a production-based car, and at least for the let's say foreseeable near future, and your definition of near future may be different than mine, but let's say 2 to 3 years at least.
Right.
It's still got to be a production-based car. But you look at the top level of the sport with the Rally 1 cars into WRC, and they went to a space-age chassis. Well, they call it a space-age chassis. Basically, it's a custom-built, partially two-frame chassis that the manufacturers then basically bolt their bodywork on to look like the production car.
Right.
So it's starting to go away from that a little bit, and certainly as hybrids have come into the top level of the sport, it's changing the direction.
Sure.
We always tend to call it about 5 years behind the FIA at least for the top level cars, just because We let them figure out everything that's wrong with them
Right.
before we worry about them. So, hybrids, for example, we have no short-term intention to bring hybrids over. And part of that is because we race in pretty remote areas. The safety equipment that you need to deal with a hybrid versus just a purely either diesel or fuel car is
Right.
different, and we just don't have the capability to say deal with a battery fire like that.
Right.
So we'll leave that to the FIA for now. For
Sure.
for the ARA and the other US series, we stay production based, and you've got to start with that chassis. So
yeah. The interesting difficulty is, like, as time goes on, even in the next 2 or 3 years, the choices of cars, like platforms that you could start with,
yeah,
might start to get less and less. And then there's other stuff going on here with, taking a production vehicle and turning it into a race car that is also turning into an interesting challenge as well.
Yeah. It's I know you had a podcast about it recently, but with the EPA decision making and whether the RPM Act goes through or not,
Right.
it certainly could change the direction of motorsport for the U.S., which would cause us obviously to have to make changes, and hopefully we don't go that direction. But it's tough, because I think that's what's always been interesting about rally is, it's the tagline: real cars on real roads driving
Right.
real fast. And
Right.
as you move away from production-based cars, even just chassis, then that kind of root and core of what the sport is kind of disappears, right?
Right.
Sure. But
Yeah.
there's a factor also of safety, and I think it's played out already at the WRC at the Rally 1 level, where the modern cars, again, really impressive looking crashes, right? But that because of their new tube frame and the crumple zones built, or not, they're not called crumple zones in their setting, but effectively, energy reduction kind of zones or whatever, right? That it's, there was a safety concern, not just, hey, we're drifting further and further away from the route of what rally is, but also, hey, look, the reality is our sport's fast. It is what the spectators want. The hybrid cars are crazy fast, right? Like they're
500 horsepower now is
Right.
what they're back up to. So
Yeah.
which is, we're getting to Group B speeds, or exceeding Group B speeds, especially when you look at even the previous generation were, right, with the advances in chassis and aerodynamics and just the dynamics of the car, right? So you need to address those safety concerns to go with it, acknowledging that, yes, you have a pinnacle level class that is going to do pinnacle level stuff. But it's a thing we run into the hill climbs as well too, going back to that argument I said earlier, and people ask, hey, why don't these idiots with their uncorked rally cars just go race unlimited? It's like, at the end of the day, I still have a steel firewall,
right,
a steel floor pan, I got a steel roof, my BPA.
Yeah, you're limited
pillars,
by the
right?
chassis you choose to start with.
Right. Yeah, I can't put, the whatever they are, 420-inch wide, Pikes Peak specials on the back of my car and put down all my two-wheel drive power. So,
right.
There's, you opened a big ethical can of worms, John, with do rally cars stay production based?
Well, and I didn't mean to, but it's mostly just
it's a good conversation, though.
The cars are changing. Cars in general are changing, and it seems like the change is coming sort of fast. Like when you look at how long, 90s to 2020. There was some development of the cars, and cars definitely got faster, but it wasn't like the degree of change that we're seeing now, like in the last 5 years with hybrids, and especially with electric cars.
Yeah.
It's moving fast in that direction, and it's one of those things where, all of us as enthusiasts are kind of having to grapple with it. Like, what is a cool car anymore? Like it does, like, just making the right noises. All of a sudden, it's like, well, this car's really quiet, but it does some crazy things. Like, is that cool? I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's interesting, because the conversations I have, of course, I have a lot of them about, do you want electric rally cars? And I have the perspective where, at the end of the day, a race car is made to go as fast as possible within the rules on whatever track, road, surface, whatever you're racing. And if the answer for that is electric, I don't care. Give me the fastest race car possible. That is what interests me in motorsport. And I remember a lot of the pushback in Formula One when they went to hybrids, and for the first couple of years they were slower than the cars before them, but very quickly they figured out the technology, and now we have some of the fastest F1 cars that have ever existed. And
Well,
you look at
and not only did they figure out the technology, but they figured out that, hey, this thing that seems like it is actually cumbersome and is a disadvantage, we can actually use this to be a huge advantage if we just change this and use it this way.
Yep,
And
yep.
now they're just, yeah, it's crazy what they're doing with those cars.
And even okay, fuel economy is not the biggest thing you want to talk about in motorsport, but the fact that F1 is now able to go as fast and generate the horsepower that they do on 3/4 the fuel that they used to run in the cars is incredible. And
WRC can do electric transit.
Yep,
Like
yeah, they have
transit,
all electric zones, and within the service park they're all electric. And what's always interested me in motorsport is the technology behind it. And we're still in the age where technology figured out at the top ends of the sport, whether it be WRC or F1, are still coming down to road production cars.
Yeah.
The KER systems of old, that would have been like 2008 to 2013 or so for the Formula One cars. That's the basis of a number of manufacturers' hybrid systems now.
Yeah.
And that was basically researched and developed for Formula One. And the reality is, oil and gas is a finite resource, not only from production but from expense. And as battery technology increases, because it's still not fully viable for us to have electric cars, but as battery technology develops and we have the next few generations, it may be. And from a motorsport perspective, again, my personal mentality is whatever you can build that's the fastest for whatever you're racing, build it. Noises and stuff aside, we'll get used to it. But it's the same argument that people have had for every major change there's been to automobiles. When we went from carburetors to to fuel injection, that was going to be the end of racing and the end of changing your cars, the end of this and then end of that. And then, oh no, actually it's a lot better. And then
and then you went from mechanical fuel injection to electronically controlled fuel injection, and
and that was the end of the world.
You're putting a computer in charge of the car. That's it.
Yep.
That's over.
And so I see this as just the next progression, and for our series, for ARA and for Rally, it'll take a little bit for us to get there. But at the end of the day, it's still whatever modern technology is. Chances are that's going to be the fastest way around whatever circuit you're racing.
Yeah. So. It's one of the core attributes of motorsports that I think grabs people is innovation. Mm-hmm. And when you see innovation, when you see something that's new, like you said, when they brought the hybrid era into the Formula One cars, it's like this seemed like a mess. And like the cars that didn't have the KER system, they were the faster cars for like the first year or two, and then all of a sudden, like it just took off, and now it's like, well, what can electricity do for me?
I think it's even quicker than that. If I remember correctly, it was 4 races for the first hybrid car to win. In Formula One, so it happened very, very quickly, and when people are spending the amount of money they do to race cars and to develop parts like that, that's what pushes innovation. And again, we're seeing the same with Rally, and I haven't listened too far into it, but your conversation with Sierra Car, there's a reason why they're developing an all electric car, and it's because the amount of torque and power they can make from small motors. We're getting closer and closer to the weight penalty, if you will, of a battery pack being offset by the amount of power you can make.
Well, and the crazy thing with coal, I guess, so this is the podcast that went up today as we're recording this. It's such a small battery, you can take it out and plug in another one. So it's an easy interchange for the battery. Mm-hmm. And what he was saying is that the power of the electric Sierra car. So this is Cole Pallison, Life Motorsports. The electric car is as fast as the RX-3 car, so the naturally aspirated Hayabusa engine car. Mm-hmm. But he, basically he's saying that he takes these cars around and people drive them around. His cost to let people drive these cars is less than half with the electric car compared to the RX-3, just because of wear and tear and stuff.
At the beginning of this, we talked about how you write rules and some of the factors into it, and there's less moving parts with electric cars, and reliability is usually better, or at least less expensive from a per race cost. So It'll be interesting to see where we're at in 5 years. Absolutely. But
It'd be cool if in a rally, like a service, you just take the fuel cell out, but it's not gasoline. It's a battery, and you set it down, you put in a new battery, and then you go off and you run the second half of stages.
Meanwhile, my fuel venting is so bad it takes me like 10 minutes to fill my car. Some electric
all of a
guy's
sudden,
like, peace out, gasoline guy.
Fueling is now a disadvantage.
Well, I was talking to someone that was involved with the Nitro Rallycross series, and they're running electric cars for that, as at least one of their classes. And one of the technologies that's being developed are basically fast charge battery packs. Yep. And so, think of, I guess the best equivalent is think of the desert trucks that have, the rigs that can dump 100 gallons of fuel into a cell in 5 seconds or whatever it is. They're developing battery charging technology that's similar, so that you could charge, at least for, say, a rallycross power application, which you don't need too large of a battery pack, but you can essentially plug this charging pack in and it charges the battery in a matter of minutes. Rather than, right now with technology, it's still 20 or so minutes to charge that car. So your turnaround suddenly become much faster. And rally is a challenge, at least on a national level, because we race in pretty remote areas. So it's hard enough to find a gas station that's close, right. Let alone the capability of charging electric cars. So, again, that's why we're still a while off, but for us, and the technical team that we've got, it's just seeing what the FIA is doing, and we've had some talks with people who want to build a Tesla, and we had a Prius as an exhibition car at Olympus last year or 2 years ago, and so the future is very, very interesting. But as a fan, I'm going to miss the bang bang noises a little bit, but some of those have gone away with the fresh air systems anyway.
That's your motivation to figure out those vintage class rules, Preston. Start working on it now, because then it's going to be really important once you've got half electric and half gasoline.
It was funny because a couple of those conversations I was having about the vintage class, they go, well, how old is vintage? They're like, oh yeah, 30 years. I'm like, perfect. So 1993 STIs can come over and compete. And they're like, wait, those are 30 years old now?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Nuts. My car's like 20 years old. Still
I know. Well, and I have a 1995 STI swap rally car. It's like, Jesus, that thing's almost 30 years old as far as the chassis goes. So.
Yep. They sit in your garage and they can get old real fast.
Yes. That is true.
Yes. Well, very cool. Well, Preston, as we're winding down, just want to say again, thank you so much for making the time, for coming on and chatting with us. Tasso, any other last questions that you want to ask Preston before we sign off?
No questions, but I just want to encourage the one or two listeners we have right now that are thinking oh, wouldn't it be, we talked about how the internet has made everything so accessible, right? Don't forget to go out to one of these events too, because if there's one thing that really stands out about Motorsports Live, it's the other sensory input you get from the event when you're there, right? The smells, the sounds, feeling cars in your chest kind of thing is one of those things that's, it's great the internet has made so much of this stuff so accessible, but go out to an ARA event, something like that, and you think rally cars until go volunteer and work a time control, right? And then you feel them drive past you, and you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. So
there's, like you say, there's nothing like seeing motorsport in person, and rally is still one of those few sports where you can get up close and personal with the cars.
Really close,
And a lot of people don't realize, but the way rally is structured, you get to see them out on the stages, but before each event, we do a park expose, which is basically like a big car show, and you can go up and, if it's a big national event, meet Travis Pastrana and Ken Block and see their cars up close before you even see them on the stages. And for the regional events, volunteers make those happen. And there's no closer you get to the action than, like you said, Tasso, being on the start line or being a marshal at a corner and getting them see them fly past.
So if you're curious, if you're curious at all about rally or want to get involved, volunteering for an event that's in your area is the best way to kind of see what it's all about, see how it all comes together, what it takes to make it all happen. And I think last time you said you've rarely, if ever, turned away any volunteers, because there's always something that needs to be done that they could use a set of hands for.
Absolutely. And, if they've come out and found us and want to be involved, we'll always find something for them to do, because obviously we understand that they're passionate about the sport and want to see it up close. So, even if we have 25 people standing at the same corner to make sure the road is safe, I'm fine with that, because it gets people engaged and gets them, share the sport we're all so passionate about. That's why we do it. So, for us, if you go to ARA-rally.com, that gets you to our website. You can see our calendar and our schedule, and there's links to all the events from there. And if you want to get involved as a competitor, that's where you find the rule books and, if you're ready to get your license and everything like that. So,
it's a great way to check it all out, volunteering, and just see what it's all about. And it's one of those things, like I said, the community of rally is really infectious. And so that would be the one word of caution is, if you go out there and you volunteer one of these events, you might really enjoy it. So,
yes.
So
and then you'll end up co-driving, and then you'll end up driving.
And
then you can have my
director.
job.
Yeah.
Yep. It happens.
Yes.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you very much again, Preston, for making the time and chatting with us. Thanks everybody that's listened, especially to the end. Really appreciate your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.